Before I get on to that, my brain's a little bit fuzzy today, so I will try and make sure I stick with what I've prepared here. I might lose track of what I'm reading. I've had, when you get those, when you have a bit of a fever and you have those weird dreams. You have weird fever dreams. Yeah, I've had a few of those this week. So not a lot of sleep this week. So just forgive me if I lose track of where I am. But here we are. We are looking at Book of Hebrews, Supremacy of Christ, Part 10. This is now Faith in Action. Last week was a call to faith. This week we're looking at Faith in Action, Hebrews 11. And today what we're looking at is what faith does. Last week we looked at the calling to faith, and this week we reflect on what faith does. The misunderstanding, as we'll get onto, sometimes this is considered a description of what faith is, and in fact it's more what faith does, which is why the title of this section, the subtitle, is called Faith in Action. It tells us what faith does for us. The examples we'll read about in Hebrews 11 is a description of what faith in God does to a person, does to people that believe in Jesus. It's meant to change our outlook, our response to one of faith-driven, from one that the world expects us to do. We move from not following the world, we don't do that anymore, and now we're faith-driven. We trust in what we do not see. What we will learn is, just as the promises were fulfilled in the Old Testament and the fulfilled promises that were accomplished in Christ through the cross, so we need to practice faith in action with the same future-looking, eager expectation for the final return of Christ. During this time we've had the conflict in Ukraine, I've certainly started seeing the kind of stuff coming out of the woodwork of people talking about, is this Isaiah this, is this Revelation this, is this... I'm telling you, you need to not worry about that. Okay, you know what you need to concentrate on is Jesus. You need to put your focus on Jesus Christ. You don't need to worry about what prophecy, what book, what section is being fulfilled or not fulfilled. It's just a distraction. Hebrews here will tell us we need to focus on what we cannot see and what is yet to come. And so here is a good lesson, certainly in relevance in what we're seeing today. There are unfortunately many people who just have a real determination to want to align pieces of scripture with worldly things going on. It's just a distraction. We need to focus on the word. We need to focus on Jesus. So with that, let's look at our first few verses and see what this is about. Now, faith, this is 1 to 3, Hebrews 11, 1 to 3. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. As we begin, what the author believes is right to do is to explain what he meant in the last words of chapter 10. Chapter 10 in the last verse says, "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved." And what he does now, when we look at Hebrews 11, he says, what does faith do then for those that have faith and are saved? And then so he begins in our first verse. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith, he says, is confidence. Where do we get confidence from? As we saw in the previous chapter, it's continually persevering in what we believe. And what we believe, whilst we can look at the word, is about trust in what we cannot see, in what we cannot see right now. And so what we'll find is that the author will now go into looking at previous heroes of the Bible to give us a glimpse of what they felt, of what they saw, and why they did what they did, even when, in those present times, they did not have the promise delivered to them, but yet they still trusted and did what they should do in that time. He wants us to know then that what he's describing is what faith does, not what faith is. Faith provides substance or assurance, and it is what we hope for. It's what's already been promised. The hope of the resurrection, the return of Christ, the glorification of the saints. Faith provides evidence in the unseen realities of the present. We see that in the forgiveness of sin through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice, and the present intercession of Christ in heaven as he intercedes for us on our behalf. Hope, as we'll see, as he's describing here, is faith relating to the future. It's trusting what will happen in the future, something we are yet to see. Ephesians 8:1 verse 18 says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has been called, which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. Romans 8 verse 24 to 25, for in this hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. So the author is here doing exactly what is said in Romans. He is saying, what is hope if you can see it? What is hope if it's right in front of you? It's not. Hope is what you cannot see. Hope is what we wait for in Jesus when he will return. So we have hope that his promises will be fulfilled. Assurance, as the author says, is faith relating to the present. We are assured of faith so we can continue on. That is our present strength we have in the word and through faith. 2 Timothy 1 verse 12 says, that is why I'm suffering as I am. And you'll notice this is a present time. Present he's describing when Paul is teaching Timothy. He says, this is why I'm suffering as I am. He's doing that right in this moment. Yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I've entrusted to him until that day. You see, he is assured of the present hope, of the present assurance, but he has future hope of what Jesus is coming to do. So his suffering is nothing in comparison to what is going to come in Jesus Christ. Paul was able to continue in his present reality of his situation because he was assured in a very real way. So we go back to our verses 2 and 3. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Now here is an important point about what faith does. The author says in verse 1, this is what faith does. The hardest part of what we believe should be that first verse. Present suffering and future hope. Now that we know that faith does these two things, verse 3 should be easier to accept. So I accept now that I have faith in Jesus Christ. That is my present strength. It is my hope for the future that Jesus will return. And he promised that, and we know he fulfills his promises because the Old Testament shows that to be true. So verse 3 is easier to accept. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. If my faith is confidence in what I do not see with my eyes, then surely logically it would follow that I can believe that God made the universe from nothing. If I've understood that God is enough in who he says he is in the word, then everything he says after that is easier to believe. Everything is easier to believe. So in verse 3, what is being proposed to us is that firstly, the universe came from nothing at the command of God himself. And you're being asked a lot of here to understand that the universe was created from nothing. But secondly, if there was nothing but God was still there, then God is not a created being himself, but the creator who always existed. This is when you unpack it, this is what you're being asked to accept when you come to be a Christian. That what the Bible says about God and who he is, and that he was there before the whole universe and the heavens were created. The Christian faith is asking you to accept that God has always been there from the beginning, and so will be there till the end. What this isn't worrying about, or we're not concerned with, is the mechanical or technical method in how that developed. We're not worrying about the 7 days or whatever you want to call it, whatever way you look at it. It's not worrying about that. Because in that we're always going to have different views. Some of us will believe that the world was created in 7 days. Some will believe it's 7,000 years. Some will believe it's linked to evolution. That's not what's being asked of us here. What's being asked of us is to believe ultimately that God created the universe, that God was existent before the universe began. He says, above all else, theologically as a Christian, you must believe that an ever-existent God created the universe from nothing. Genesis 1:1-2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How can you have a God who didn't exist create something that didn't exist? God was always existent before everything came into being. Now the earth was formless, empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Before anything, there was and is God. So what we're going to see now as we press more into Hebrews here is a list of people who believed in what God said he was going to do before he would do it. So what he's done here in these just the first 3 verses of Hebrews is to set the standard and say that God from the beginning knew everything and does everything. He is able to do everything from the start to the end. He will fulfill everything about his promises because he said he would. What we'll find now is that he'll go through this list of people. All these people attest to the value of living by faith. They compose the cloud of witnesses who give powerful testimony to the Hebrews that they should come to faith in God's truth in Jesus. So let's have a look at Hebrews 11 verse 4-7. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. In this kind of first Hall of Fame sandwich, as you might want to see, we're looking at these first few people. And what we find that holds all these people together is in verse 6. And without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. You see why the first part is important, because you must believe that God exists. Not only must you believe that God exists, you must believe exactly who he is and who he says he is, so that you can believe in the God of the Bible, not the God of the universe in the sense of the worldly one or the God of some other religion, God of the Bible. What these three particular people had in common, and the others we will look at, was an understanding that faith at its most basic level must believe that God exists. Without this fundamental acceptance of truth, it is impossible to please God. Without accepting the very nature of God and who he is, we cannot please him. And yes, when we look at these verses, there is some sense of warning about a salvation based on works. But what is the point of doing anything to please the God of the universe when those people do not believe in exactly who he is? The writer reminds us that faith is not necessarily rewarded on earth. It is something that we have to come to terms with, because we pray about all sorts of things. We want God to do all sorts of things, to intervene in all sorts of things. And yet maybe he won't do that sometimes. Maybe he allows things to happen, and they are his reasons for allowing that to happen. But can we come to terms with that? Can we accept it? Or that means what we must do is accept that God has all authority over all things. He is able to be fully in control of all things, even if it appears he might not be to us. But let me remind you of this. He is in control always. Always. And we'll see what we're seeing on our TV screens in the news, and we'll say, is this really a God who's in control? There are so many very deep technical things about why these things are allowed to happen in our world today, why wars are allowed to reign, is because God has given us capacity to make our own choice. What that means is that some of those choices will be bad choices. Some of the things we decide to do will be terrible things that we do. But God in his grace has allowed us to do that, because if he doesn't, we are condemned. If he doesn't allow grace, if he doesn't allow us to make a choice, we are condemned anyway. So let me be clear, God is most definitely in control. God himself, it says, testifies to the righteousness of the faithful. Abel's blood still speaks to us, and what this is a reminder of is a value in eternity. What the writer is trying to do is to get us to look up and into the future, into what God is going to do. Because what he wants to do is take our eyes off of all of this other stuff that's going on, because if we don't have faith in God, that he's in those things, that he's working in those things, and we get drawn into all these present day things, we lose sight of what God's really doing, of what's going to come. We lose sight of hope, which is that Jesus will return one day, and judgment will come for all people. So we, as Christians, we don't believe in God now for now. God is not a God of convenience. We don't believe in him because right now he's convenient to us. We believe in God because of what is to come. And so it enables us to be confident in the present. Despite the suffering we see around us, we can be confident that Jesus is coming. We don't need to cling to our God as if he's going to suddenly go away. It's not that sort of desperation. God is there and will always be there. And so it's not a kind of clinging on, it's holding. It's holding on. He's always going to be there. So we're assured that he is entirely present. And so what we need to find is sufficiency in that, and therefore hope of what is to come. It is sufficient in our current present sufferings, that we know that the promises are being fulfilled literally as we speak, as we sit in this room right now. The specific biblical God that we see in the Bible cannot be found in any other religion. Many other religions do not speak so openly and honestly about the depravity of mankind in sin. I read somewhere, there's a constant comment from people who don't believe in God about the Bible, and they say, the Bible is irrelevant, it's old, it's outdated. And I have to say, I have to put a challenge to those people and say, have you read the Bible? I've never seen a book more in date, more relevant, that describes exactly who we are than the Bible itself. The Bible describes exactly who we are in the old days, in the Old Testament, right up to the current day. It is always relevant. The Bible and Christianity itself is the only faith that presents both the illness and the cure. No other religion provides you or wants to enlighten you or reveal to you the illness, the sinfulness that exists in our world. I think many other religions would like to present the cure because that's the happy bit, right? That's the bit at the end. If you sort of seek some sort of weird enlightenment or whatever it is, whatever other religion might profess to give you, it will never give you the reason why you need to seek that, not the true reason. Yet the Bible tells you specifically why you need that cure. It is because we are sinful, depraved, and in need of salvation. The cure is found in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. That is the God that the author is calling his audience to know and us to continually remember. Let's continue. Hebrews 11, 8-12. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. This guy's got an obsession with people being dead. And there's a reason for that. And it's because he's saying, even though they're now gone, even though they're now dead, even though their life was limited, they had faith to know what was coming after them. They did the work of that present day because they trusted that God was doing something in the future that they would not be on earth for, that they would not be living for in that point. They would be dead by the time Jesus came. The example of Abraham here is to remember that the work done in the present under the obedience to God is not going to always grant you present results. Hebrews 11 is in fact that lesson as a whole. We are in this world constantly looking at instant results. Sometimes that might creep into our prayers, I think. It creeps into the way we worship God, to the way we ask God of things, for things that we truly want and we truly have a passionate heart about. But we're not praying for instant results. What we're praying for is a peace. The Bible says that prayer brings peace. If I pray, it's not necessarily that you would pray for a specific outcome, but actually prayers in themselves are to give you peace in your heart, to know that in the present time, whilst there is suffering, in the future that will change. That will be different. Stop looking, I've written here, at the present actions we do as believers and as a church in the way that is about solving issues now. We need to stop looking at solving the issue right away. In fact, prayer is about trusting in what God is doing in the present, what God has planned in the present. Our prayers are merely just remembering to ourselves that God is in charge. In the same way, we don't do works on this building to impress people. We do it because God has given us something to look after. And when we look after it, we should look after it well. And when we give people something to come to that we want to serve them, we should serve them well. We should serve them with our best. And yet I'm troubled constantly by how churches are allowed to fall into decay because, well, it's just the church, and yet we'll go home and we'll spend a lot of money on our homes, won't we? I'm sure there's a lesson in that in the Old Testament. I believe it was Nehemiah, when people were spending their money on their own places and not in God's buildings or God's temple. And that's not to say that we make this a big shiny building, but when we offer Christ, when we're doing the work of Jesus, we should give people our best. We should show that we really do care about them. The last thing we want to do is to walk them into a building that is leaking, that has got cracks down the walls, that has got no heating. These are all very practical things, but they're quite important in telling people that we value them. That we, yes, ultimately want to see them come to Jesus, but we value them. So that's why we do the work we do here in this building. And even when we do that work here, we do this for the future. We do it in the same way that Hebrews is saying here. It won't necessarily serve the amount of people that this building can hold right now. But shouldn't we facilitate future generations that might actually be working in that way, where they've got loads of people coming into the building, they've got loads of people coming to worship Jesus? Should we not always be looking to the future so that the church remains a beacon in its community? So we do this for the future, not necessarily for a present reality. For as long as Christ is still to come, so the church should stand as a beacon for future generations to pick up the baton and run with it until the day he comes. You should always be thinking past the point you have left this place. And what I mean by left this place, I mean you've gone to see Jesus. Our mentality should always be, what happens after I go? What happens after I leave? We do the work now so that future generations can do the work in the future, so they can serve God as God has called them to. Verse 10, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. As I said, in this generation of incident results, we as the church are looking forward not to next month, not to next year, but into eternity. For when we leave this place, we will join with God praising his name. And so the next generation will be here building on those foundations. Let's move forward. Hebrews 11, 13 to 16. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they'd left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. The key here, looking forward, not looking back. There's no simpler way to understand these set of verses other than they looked forward no matter how much they had to squint, no matter how much they could not see necessarily the full picture. They were always looking forward. They still knew that what they did in their present was for the future of God's people and his plan. I need to tell you that something that I've had to come to terms with more recently is that whatever we do here to try and reach our neighbours with the gospel, that there is a possibility that it won't happen. That it won't happen in some of our lifetimes. Or maybe all of our lifetimes. But we don't do it for instant result. We do the work now because God has called us to do the work now, whatever work that is. But you might look at that and say, well, that's a bit depressing. You saying we're not going to get more people, we're not going to... That's not what we're focusing on, is it? I really hope it isn't. Because that's quite... I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's quite shallow. If all we're worried about is people walking through the door, where's Jesus? Where's our faith in the all-knowing, all-powerful God? Irrespective of how many people sit in this room. But let me be clear, I am all for our neighbours, our friends and our family coming to Jesus today. Yes, absolutely. But our faith is not in their ability to come to Jesus, or whether they make a decision to follow Jesus. For that can be futile if all our faith is placed in them. Our faith is what is sure and true. Regardless of the individual decisions made by unbelievers. So this mentality, when we look at it this way, when we focus our faith on what is sure and true, firstly, it focuses us on the important mission for gospel sharing. For we know what awaits each person, as we have now had it revealed to us. So we want those who do not believe to share in it. I have no problem with that at all. We do want people to come to Jesus. But secondly, as long as we keep focusing on Jesus, on the one true reason why we're here, what it will do is it will stop us from seeking a result-driven church for the present. There are no targets here to hit. I have enough of that in my own job. Yeah? I don't need to come to church to find result-driven church. And you'll find a million books written about how you can increase your congregation or your amount of people. Listen, most of the time I would argue that those principles or those concepts are compromising the gospel. How is there so many books about getting more people to come to church? It's because people are so focused on the numbers and the people in the room. And yet we are not focused enough on Jesus. Because our world, our life is driven by targets, by goals. So suddenly we've turned church into a target and a goal. That's not what it's meant to be here for. The church is meant to be different from the world. It stands different from the rest of the world. It stands as a beacon for hope, which does not rely on targets and goals. There's nothing wrong with ideas, nothing wrong with plans and ideas and finding ways to present the gospel. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But let's not get hung up on it. We do them And you know what? Because our faith is in Jesus, if it doesn't work, Lord, glorify you. Whether no person turned up or one person turned up or 20 people turn up. Oh Lord, let you have all the glory. Let us instead be sure of one thing that I think we must always do, and it's in Matthew 6:33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. See, all that comes after. All that other stuff, it comes after. You see why the author in Hebrews is saying you're unable to please God? Yeah, you know what? If we're going for all the things first, you can't please him. But if you seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, that will please him. That will make him happy. And all these things will be given to you as well. Let's move on. Hebrews 11:17-19. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. You ever wondered why Abraham gave up his son or willing to kill his son? It's right here in Hebrews. It tells you why he was going to do that. It's really helpful, isn't it, to know why Abraham was willing to do that to his son. Because he knew that God could raise people from the dead. That if that was going to be what was going to happen, then that's fine, because God would have a plan to deal with it. And God is powerful enough to raise people from the dead. What this reveals to us in this particular example of Abraham is that he didn't do it blindly. Read those words. Abraham reasoned. He reasoned. He knew God. He knows enough about God. He has faith in him. And so he reasoned that God could even raise the dead. If God is all powerful, he reasoned, so he could raise my son from the dead. He did it in faith and in knowing who God is, and in knowing that God would be able to raise Isaac from the dead. Abraham trusted in what he could do, what he could not see, and what had not yet happened. He was obedient in the present for the hope of the future. These are all the same examples over and over again. What he was going to do in the present was because he had faith in the future, that he knew that God could raise him from the dead. He goes on, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Simply put, just in these few verses, they trusted in the future of God's plan, God's provision, by acting in their present, in a future they would not see themselves. It's something we're going to have to try and get over in the fact that the world teaches us that we should expect to see the results of our work right now. Yet Hebrews, the Bible, says that that's not how it works here. Faith is literally about faith. It's about trusting that God is going to do something in the future, and that whatever work you do now is a contribution towards that. But it may not get the results that you are expecting. But God knows what results he's going to produce. So we should have faith in that. Goes on, 24-31. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell, after the army marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. All these particular events in these few verses have something in common. When you read about these events in the Old Testament themselves, what you'll find in one way or another is that the faith they have in God provokes them in a difficult way. Having faith in God on many occasions will be, for your flesh and your mind, like sucking a bitter lemon or pouring salt on a wound. Rahab, by the way, when she spoke to the spies, she says to them, I saw your God and we were in fear of him. Yes, she did help them and she wanted to, she believed in their Lord, but she was struck by fear. Moses questioned on quite a few occasions the actions of what God was doing, because that got to him. It was challenging what he was doing in the flesh. So all these things have that in common. They're challenging what we are expected to do in the flesh, and yet the Spirit is saying, no, you don't do the same things when you're a Christian, when you're a believer, when you're a follower of God. They will work counter to what your flesh tries to tell you or tries to do. They won't hardly ever agree with one another. It will fizz at your flesh. It will irritate a worldly mind. Faith works against and has an agenda opposite to the worldly way of living. So don't expect it to be easy when you're faced with a sense from God that you're called to do something, and yet your mind and your logic says, no. It shouldn't be any surprise that there are times when those things clash, when those things do not agree with one another. God's actions, which appeared to be against the logic of their minds, either made them question God's actions or made them fear God's actions. Either way, faith irritated what was humanly logic, and brought them into alignment with God's way through that very faith. He goes on, and what more shall I say? I do not have time to talk about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. Let me sum this up. Such was the trust these people had in God, that the world was not worthy of such selflessness towards God. Such was their future-looking faith, that the world was befuddled, the world was confused, and even angered by their ability in their faith to look past their present situations. This is what the author is describing right here. They lived destitute, they lived in holes, in caves. That angers the world. When it doesn't harm you, when it doesn't harm your soul, the world is angered by that. But these people who are faithful, who wanted to continue to do the work of God, he said, but my place is not here. My home is not here. And I do this because this is for now. But the day will come when I will be with my God. And that's the future they're all looking towards. That whatever happened in their present, their future was assured in Jesus. The world was not worthy of their unworldliness. So trusting they were of their God. A quote here from Morris, theologian. He says, the despised and ill-treated group of servants of God was of greater real worth than all of the rest of humanity put together. The world is not necessarily friendly to people of faith. And the world isn't necessarily worthy of them either. So we have even more reasons for faith, more reasons to hold on to faith than these heroes of the faith ever did. For us, we can see right now through Jesus Christ and his sacrifice and his resurrection. For us, it has happened. For them, it had not. We have even more reason. And so in the last two verses, it says, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. They only saw the promise from afar. They did not receive the enactment of the promise, the testimony of the completed work of the Messiah on their behalf, as we have today. And yet they could still continually have faith in the Lord of something that was so far off from them. They were still able to trust that God was going to deliver, even after their lifetime. We have been provided with something better and have much more reason to hold on to faith and to not let discouragement and tough times defeat us. The idea of perfect is complete. They could not be made complete until the work of Jesus. They looked forward to Jesus and his work. Today, we look at the completed work of Christ. And in that we are assured of a glorious hope for the future. And every day that will be us. Christians now, we have the cross which has been paid, which has been done. The death has happened, the resurrection has occurred, salvation has been provided. The promises have been carried out. So our reasons for trusting in God that he will deliver on the remaining promises, what reasons do we have not to believe him? Let's pray and then